Hey there, Radioheads. Welcome to another episode of Radio KBE. I hope everybody's doing well. Whether you're watching this during the day or in the evening, I hope you're having a good day or good evening. Lakers had Media Day today, and there was a lot of interesting stuff. I would say some of the stuff we expected, but there were some interesting things that came out of that sort of just came out of the entire media day, and I thought maybe we just kind of discuss out loud some of the stuff that went on with the media day, and so some of the answers that some of the players gave, and just the general optimism that was going on, along with just some of the nonsense questions that we expected from the reporters and whatnot. As always, if you guys can like and subscribe the video, it helps out a lot. The likes help it show up more and circulate more on YouTube. So if you guys can do that, I'd appreciate it. If you're not already subscribed, I highly recommend subscribing. I have some cool stuff coming up as once preseason starts kicking in and stuff like that. Trivia, prizes, just stuff that makes Lakers basketball fun and not just a chore of complaining and stuff like that. So, if you'd like to subscribe, you're always welcome to do so. And if not, you can just like the video or share it on Twitter, and I appreciate that too as well. So, let's jump in. So prior to today, on Sunday night, there was um, essentially there was a story that was released. Russ did an interview with Woj on ESPN, and he essentially talked about just sort of his situation, and the obvious fact that the Lakers have been trying to trade him since like the deadline of last season, and just kind of how all that stuff has gone and where he's at mentally and where he's at emotionally and stuff like that when it comes to the team. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward. He gives very sort of professional answers, and that's something that that's a message that I've tried to consistently share with everybody. Like, he knows that, like, he has to be a pro. It's a no-win situation for Russ right now, when it comes to LA, and just navigating this entire thing, because even if he's right, nobody's going to take his side just because of the nature of how things have gone and what the perception of him is amongst fans. And again, we don't have to get back into it, but the front office did a lot through the media to make him look bad. And it's not like he helped himself with his on-court play, but it's certainly not as bad as everybody made it sound, or sort of the blame that got put on him. So, anyways, moving forward, in that article, he gives very professional answers, and he basically says that, whether, however fans may feel about him, whether, uh, you know, like the Lakers are eventually going to trade him or whatever it is, like, it's his job to show up and do his job and be successful. And I saw yesterday there was people tweeting. First and foremost, I saw like 50,000 screenshots of the same exact paragraph being shared by a lot of different people, which is fine, but it's just like, my whole thing is, if you already see it circulating on the timeline, just, you probably don't have to share it, but people do it anyways. But it's all exactly like the same quote. But I think the fascinating part is just seeing how many people, like, the way they interpret statements. And like, all he said is, I have to show up and do what I've always done, which is, compete, play hard, that sort of thing. And somehow people were spinning that into like something negative, like, oh no, we don't want him to do the same thing he's always done. Like, they almost took the statement literally, and they didn't use any sort of, like, when I saw tweets like that saying like, oh no, we don't want him to do the same stuff that he's always done. We want him to play better. Like, I I think that's implied, and I saw a lot of people saying that, like, it's concerning that he phrased things in that manner, and I don't think it's that deep. I don't think he was saying that I'm just gonna come and play exactly the same way that I've always played. It's been pretty consistent messaging that him and Darvin Ham have talked about it, and then today too. Like, today, in today's media thing, like, there's a lot of conversation. AD talked about it, LeBron talked about it, and also Russ talked about it, about many conversations that they've had over the course of the offseason about how things can work, what makes, how they can be successful, and that sort of stuff. Now, obviously, the shadow of Russ being traded is always, or the cloud is always going to be there. But if for the time that he's on this roster, even if it's going into the regular season, like, you have to make it work the best you can, right? Like, you don't want, because not only is it for Russ if he wants his next contract, it's also just, you want to leave on good terms with your teammates and stuff like that, and we'll get more to that in a second. So I thought that was really strange. But then again, like, our fan base has sort of been in that, like it's like I said, it's a no-win situation. There's nothing he can do or say that's going to change anybody's perception. And so, obviously, results are really all that matters. And so, if the Lakers could put wins on the columns early, um, that'll go a long way towards the belief that this Lakers team is better than what it looks like. Obviously, it has basketball issues as it is, but it'll win some confidence back from the fans. And look, there's no confusion, right? Like the Lakers could start off like 8-2, and all the people who have consistently been putting down this team and putting down the players on the team, like over and over again, and just completely ignoring the fact that the front office is doing a very poor job of assembling this team to some degree, without with the deficiencies that it has, like they're just going to pivot, right? Like they're just going to go from, oh, they're 8-2, so what? Like it's only October or it's only November, or even if they're successful going into the next season, they have like a winning record or whatever it is. Like people are going to say, oh, we'll wait till the playoffs. Like it's people who, and that's my stance is at this point, with everything that's gone on this offseason, especially what happened last season, is like I don't feel like arguing it anymore. Like arguing with people whose default position is that the Lakers are going to fail because one player is on the team, or even if that player wasn't on the team, they still won't be good enough, or they won't get a return that's good enough. Like people who take that default position, it's just like, what is the point of arguing with them? In my opinion, they're entitled to their opinions, and if I'm more of a glass half full guy, then I can accept that difference and just move on. Fans are allowed to do whatever they want to do, but it's just like there's no. I don't want to spend energy arguing with people who don't think that this team can be successful in any capacity or any degree. Like what how many games do you have to win in the first 20 games to convince somebody that maybe this team is better than it was last season, right? Like is it 15 games? Do they have to go 15-5, or is 13-7 acceptable? Like that sort of stuff. Like it's always going to be a sliding scale, and people will always be pivoting, um, because people don't care about basketball when it comes to this team. Sometimes they just want to be right, and that's probably not just with the Lakers. It's really with NBA Twitter in general. People just love to argue, and they really want to be right. The basketball doesn't even matter. But this is now digressing in a different direction altogether. But I thought Russ's responses were really good. There was a lot of professionalism that he showed on his end, and he's much more aware of the combative. The part that I thought that was really interesting was where he talked about how last season he didn't know how to deal with sort of the angst and like the animosity that his family was receiving, and that was just something that he was used to. So he was always very defensive and stuff like that in regard to it. And I think today he mentioned how him and Darvin Ham have been very close in the conversations that they've had, and that he has a lot of trust in Darvin Ham. So like when he said that, that sort of echoed to me a little bit about just sort of what sort of there was a lot of talk about like friction between Vogel and Russ, and Russ said over and over again like he doesn't know what Vogel's issue with him was and stuff like that. And I'm not to say that Russ didn't have any part in it, and whatnot, but like the fact that he's reinforcing that relationship with Darvin Ham and just kind of talking about it in that manner is really interesting. So like that article was served its purpose, just to let people know that this is how he feels. But that doesn't stop reporters from asking dumb questions, or not dumb questions, but like it doesn't stop reporters from asking this, a loaded question or a baited question. And the earlier today, that's what Bill Plaschke did. He asked Russ like, whether you want to be here with the Lakers. Do you think the Lakers want you there? And again, there's no purpose to that, right? There's no reason for that question other than to try and elicit a negative reaction from Russ. You want the soundbite from Russ. And this is not the only time this is going to happen. This is going to consistently keep happening as long as he's on this team. If Russ has a bad body language, I mean, just look at Twitter. Like, people are, saying that, oh, well, Russ isn't embracing LeBron and AD or giving him hugs or dapping him up like he did last season. When they did their initial introductions, they're not smiling as much, or they're standing too close to each other. Like, it's silly now, right? Like, these are adult people, and we're treating them like they're, I don't know, like they're experiments or something like that in a laboratorium, and we're observing them for their behavior. Like it's just silly. Like a couple episodes ago, I said that if Russ and LeBron don't get along, I'm okay with that because at least now we have two adults in this situation, right? You're not trying to force something about what worked and what didn't work, and trying to like make things work. At least they're coming out with it and acknowledging that things didn't work and what needs to work, what needs to be successful. And Russ mentioned that. AD actually mentioned that in media today. So like that was another thing that was interesting to hear, that AD mentioned that he had specifically told Russ towards the end of the season, especially, just be yourself, just play the way you normally want to play and stuff like that. And I thought that was interesting because Russ in his exit interview said the same thing. He said that, well, it's supposed to be like they want me to play like I am, but that's not really what's happening here. And I think a lot of people took that as like a shot at LeBron and AD, and I don't think that's what that was. And I don't know what episode it was that I discussed that, but my interpretation of when Russ said that wasn't him taking a shot at LeBron and AD. And I understand that most people thought that's what that was, and I think that people had a lot of stance of like, Russ threw LeBron under the bus and stuff like that. And when he said that, I don't think that's because LeBron only played 40 games. You can't throw a guy under the bus when he's only played half the season. Very hard to do. I always thought that statement was more directed at Frank because Frank didn't know how to use Russ. He just would just put him in different places and hope that everything would work out. He's not an offensive minded coach. Even the combinations of players that he played with Russ didn't make any sense. He'd play old and slow guys who couldn't get up and down the floor in transition with Russ, and that didn't make any sense. But then magically, when Russ played with Malik Monk and Austin Reeves, and he played with more able-bodied guys like Stanley Johnson and Wendy Gabriel, all of a sudden the Lakers looked like a better team, a more competent team. And so I never took that as, me personally, I never took that statement as a shot at LeBron. I always took it as a shot more about Vogel. And I think LeBron said something about, like today in the media about like the Lakers having a great coach or finally having a great coach or something like that on board and stuff. And you could extract whatever interpretation that you want from that. But it was interesting to see, and I think it was good to hear that whether they had extensive conversations or not, that like there was a discussion on the back end about it. And it seemed like, even LeBron in many of the interviews, even the individual interview he did with Spectrum, like he was very in really good spirits, right? Like if you think about some of the other media days that have happened with, the Suns, DeAndre Ayton, some of the stuff that came out with the Nets, the stuff that came out with like the Celtics, in any tenuous situations, like the mood of some of those media days were a little dour, and the Lakers didn't feel that way. Like literally outside of the Plashke question, it seemed like everybody was in pretty good spirits, smiling, enjoying, embracing each other. Like it didn't seem like there was any contentiousness between any of the players. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and stuff like that, but it really felt like the media was trying to make it contentious, and I don't think that's an unfair observation to make. Nothing that Ham said or any of the players said made me feel less enthusiastic or less optimistic about the season. Again, I know there are basketball issues with this team, size, shooting, that sort of thing. But even Patrick Beverley, like the arch nemesis, the guy who all last season people were posting quotes of him talking about Russ, like he's telling stories. And I was watching the Spectrum stream. He tells a story which he says he didn't tell. He's never told anybody, but he told for the first time in the interview today about Russ. Like when Russ was with the Rockets and Pat was with the Clippers. This is maybe a year or two. When Russ was with the Rockets, he was only there for about a year. He got Pat's sister courtside seats in Houston for her to see him play when the Clippers came to play the Rockets. And Pat says that's when like our relationship started changing. And he talks about like Russ being a very religious guy and Pat is also a very religious guy and stuff like that. And him seeing him around at the chapel and stuff like that. But like that's a good example of what I'm talking about. Like what I've been trying to tell people. That I've never heard players say bad things about Russ that have been teammates of Russ or that like actually have interactions with them in person. So last season when there was crazy stuff being said about him as a teammate, stuff like, oh, he didn't want the ball to be brought up by anybody else and only by him. Like that stuff sounded so out. Like it's our fan base just believed it. Like they just believed outright because they were so down on him. But it's just like everything that I've heard after that is the complete opposite from players that he played with last season, even for short periods of time, as well as like even the guys that he's just started hanging out with in the off season. So Stanley Johnson said he'd bet his new contract, that Russell have a better season than he did last year. Austin Reeves has said positive things. Malik said that he's learned from Russ. Thomas Bryant today in media day said that he's spent time with Russ. He spent time with AD, and he said Russ has looked fantastic and AD's looked fantastic. Like it's just there's a lot of positive things being said, not just about Russ, but about the team in general. That it's hard not to try and be optimistic, but temper your expectations based on what basketball limitations they have. And it's just it's really strange to see folks in the media try to like drum up the nonsense, right? Like these guys are having to be the adults in the room. And so like now I really get it. Like now for me personally, like I always thought that there were a lot of times where Russ didn't need to be combative with the media because there are folks in the media that are nice to him. But it's just like you get questions like the Plashke thing today. Like it just puts a entire damper on the entire thing. It's not like he's always asking these questions, but it's just like if it's not basketball related, like how is he supposed to answer that question? How do you answer a question where it says, "Well, do you think the Lakers want you?" You're just basically insulting the person to his face, right? And that's the part that's really annoying. I don't know if it's going to change. Like even if the Lakers start off well, I wouldn't expect media folks to just be like, "Oh yeah, wow, the Lakers look much better." Maybe it was their health, or maybe it was Vogel. They're still going to cast their doubts or hedge their bets and stuff like that. But media day, I thought today was really good. I thought in AD's interview and him talking about, he mentioned jokingly, he mentioned that like when his wife was pregnant, she couldn't really travel, she couldn't get around and stuff like that. And they traveled a little bit, but he said eventually, and my wife told me like, you gotta go, work, like you gotta go get your gym sessions in, you gotta get your shoot arounds and all that sort of stuff, because she couldn't get around because she was pregnant. So it's just like, very clearly he's a new dad. He just had another kid. Like that was a big important part of his off season and stuff like that. And he had to be told like, hey, get back to doing what you're doing. Like don't worry about everything else. And it's good to hear that like he's in a good space mentally and he's in a good space physically. LeBron said it's the first time he's been healthy in a long time that he's adjusted his regimen to as well. So that's great to hear. But like I said, like AD's in good spirits. LeBron is in good spirits, and Russ was professional. Like even when he was being chastised, or more or less being insulted with some of the questions that he was getting, like he still kept professional, which he probably wouldn't have done before. But credit to him, probably credit to his agent who let him know in advance that he's probably gonna get stupid questions like that, and he also did the interview the night before, probably hoping that people wouldn't ask him dumb questions like that. But this is LA media. Like people in LA media, they don't care about basketball, and the fans do. Like the fans really care about basketball, but there are people who don't care about basketball. They just care about in the media, and then probably in the fans alike, right? Like they don't care about whether this team wins or loses. They just care about getting the engagement that they want, so that they can be successful, or they can get jobs, or whatever it is that they want to aspire for and stuff like that. So I thought today's media day was really good. The only thing that I would say, and then there was one other moment, at least with Darvin Ham, that I thought was a little interesting, where they asked him about his Russ's starting job and stuff like that, and there's a big thing made about like him being non-committal to Russ, and it's not that he was non-committal to Russ. He just said we like our options, and so people took that as him being non-committal to Russ, which is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think like if people are trying to load up the situation to being something similar to like, oh, Russ could actually lose his shot at the starting job and stuff like that, so now he's got to be humble. Like there's also a possibility that Russ beats the shit out of Pat and Dennis in in camp, and then all this like this build up and stuff like that people were doing about Russ potentially losing his starting job, which he may, I don't know, like that goes in the opposite direction. That means Russ is jumping through the hoops that you guys are making him jump through successfully. So like that's the sort of stuff that like I think is, I think that's probably the only thing that I was concerned about with what Darvin Ham said. But it's not really a concern. Like you knew that that was going to be the answer that he was going to give. That's been like sort of the stance that the franchise is taking and stuff like that. So I didn't mind that at all. The one thing I did find, that was annoying, not annoying, but like just kind of just rolled my eyes was almost everything Rob Pelinka said. Like if there's one quality that I think Rob Pelinka has that is elite, is he knows how to use the word count to his answers, like to his advantage. Like he says stuff, he like does exposition when it comes to his answers to certain questions, basketball questions, which do nothing to answer the question other than just to fill up the time. Like, like if you were ever in a speech class in college and you had to give a speech, impromptu speech and then talk for 5 minutes, like, how you'd probably like bullshit your way through like the first 3 minutes and give maybe like a minute or two really good stuff that's relevant to the subject. Just to get the grade that you want to get because you got to fill it out. Like that's what Rob's answers remind me of. Like he keeps like he'll say like players' entire first names and where they came from and how he signed them, and he'll put that within his actual answer itself. But he never actually answers the question in itself. Like he said today that they thought of Pat as a wing defender and that he's a 3-and-D guy, which is fine. And there many people have mentioned. I think somebody may have asked him about the amount of guards, whether they're undersized and stuff like that. And like none of his answers were just like it was just like word salad. Like he said stuff, but there was no real answer to anything they did. The only thing that I would say that he probably talked about was, and then again he did it in a diplomatic manner, same way a professional man, same way that Russ did. He does do that. Talking about trading him, and he said, we're always looking to improve the team. Trade picks that we need to if we need to, but it has to be for the right deal. And I think that's the right answer for anything. I don't think very much of like him mentioning that they would trade 2 picks or anything like that. Like Russ is aware of it. Like there's no that is the elephant in the room, right? Like there's no confusion about it. But it just that's my thoughts. Like every time he speaks, like I don't believe him. Like there's I could tell by his answer that he just wants to get through that question in a manner that is like sounds satisfying. It's not actually satisfying, but it sounds satisfying. Like and then obviously he's not going to acknowledge that they don't have, that they probably should have a few more wing defenders, or that he hasn't necessarily addressed the shooting. Nobody's in the media is going to press him, right? Like the same way that Russ got an insulting question from Bill Plaschke, nobody's going to press Rob about his job because they'll lose access, right? Or he'll stop fielding their questions and stuff like that. And that's not exclusive to what the Lakers do. It's all teams will do stuff like that, right? The Knicks don't even take questions they like just do broadcasts or something like that with their fan base and stuff like that. But like that's my point. Like when it comes down to like the basketball stuff, you can't bullshit around the basketball stuff. Like there has to be you have to be able to talk to it. And, I think Rob's sort of thing has been, default stance has always been, well, I think Coach Ham will expound on it, which is fine because he is a coach and he would. But at the same time, Ham isn't designing the roster. The decisions being made as to you sign a 6'4" Lonnie Walker and then trade for Patrick Beverly and trade a 6'6" wing away in the process. And then on top of that, you use another free agent spot to sign Dennis Schroeder. So now you've got 3 guys who would conceivably play 2 positions while already having Austin Reeves and Kendrick Nunn on your roster. Like, if I had to think about it, I would think, okay, they probably signed Dennis as insurance in case they do decide to trade Russ and they need to get somebody to quickly fill in the role that Russ would have had or the minutes that Russ would have had. He's not going to say that publicly, which is fine, but be a little bit more thought out. When it comes to these things, because we all watch the same team and we all look at the same roster. So I think that was probably the only part of media day that I was just like, yeah, I didn't really get much out of this, but that's just how things work. That's just kind of how Rob works, and I think like I said, I'm high on Coach Ham. I'm high on the players. Um, I do think we have a shooting deficiency and stuff like that, and for us to overcome or be a league average shooting team, like we have to like somebody has to step up or play beyond what their typical shooting stats are, and it's not just Russ. It has to be AD and some of the role player guys and stuff like that. So those deficiencies and that roster construction question and stuff like that is still there, and the undersizedness of the perimeter is still there. That doesn't mean that this team won't be successful or it can't be successful or that players can't get moved or we can't improve. But for the most part, that media day was good. Like it could have gotten significantly worse. It could have been much, much worse. If it was the way that Lakers Twitter wants it to be, Russ would have been very combative with people in the media. He would have been very combative about what people have been saying about him and his teammates and just kind of all the stuff that happened and stuff like that during the offseason. But he wasn't. And I think that's a good thing. And we'll see what happens with this roster on opening night and what happens in training camp and what gets decided. But I thought today was a good day. And I thought, a lot of the answers. I'm really excited to see how Thomas Bryant and Damian Jones, Juan Toscano Anderson, Lonnie Walker, how all these guys are going to be doing, and Austin Reeves. Oh, by the way, Austin said that he put on weight, which I think is great. That was one last thing I was going to mention. I think that's really good. Like I think he said he's moved up to about 200 pounds. Austin's about 6'4", 6'5". That's a big deal because we had too many guys that were light, like in weight. So Pat, I think, is closer to 200 pounds, or not 200 pounds, like 185, 190. Dennis is very small, very slim. But I know Lonnie, his measurables are pretty close to what KCP's were. And now Austin's put on some weight also. So I like that. I like that these guys have, like worked on their strength. He talked about improving his strength profile and stuff like that. That was a big deal for him. I think a lot of teams or players are trying to go right through his chest to try and just basically score on him. And it was tough for him to keep up that way. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that sort of translates on the court. But I think there's a lot of good reason for optimism. I think there's a lot of good energy. And one last thing I will say is I get the Pat signing a little bit more now. I don't think he was just brought on just to be like Russ insurance or to be like the guy who plays next to Russ. I think he was also brought on to be like a culture setter for the rest of the team too as well, because that's what a lot of his language was about, just getting guys together. He had a funny story where he said that Kendrick Nunn saw him doing film study and he said that Kendrick Nunn told me, he's like, oh, you're doing film study already? And Pat was like, hell yeah, you need to come over here and do it too. And like that level of accountability, I think is a big deal. And that may be why they brought him. They feel that his culture, along with what Darvin Ham's principles and stuff like that are, will help sort of make a more cohesive locker room. That was something that the last year's team was really lacking. We didn't have more veteran guys that were just kind of about togetherness and stuff like that. So, as always, I'm always optimistic about this team. I think they'll be successful, and we'll see how things go once training camp gets through and stuff like that, and if anything happens. But as always, I appreciate you guys watching. If you can like and subscribe, I always appreciate it. And then if nothing else, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful evening. And I'll see you guys in the next video. So I hope you guys take it easy.